Greetings, everyone, and welcome to SpaceWeek Live, episode 119 for this Sunday, Sunday, May 22nd, 2022. Sorry for the delay. I had to finish preparing. I got a phone call earlier that pushed me out by a few minutes, but here we are. So let's get right into it. Last Sunday night, was the total lunar eclipse, visible all across the Western Hemisphere, weather permitting. I myself had clouds and tall trees blocking my view, but the eclipse was captured by many people elsewhere, although an awful lot of people were reporting clouds that night. But this photo was posted by Andrew Moe on Twitter. This photo by Stonehenge Dronescapes is actually from an earlier eclipse, not last Sunday's, but I wanted to show it because it's a fantastic shot. Lunar eclipses can only happen during a full moon, because by definition they happen when the moon is on the opposite side of Earth from the sun, in the umbra of Earth's shadow. They don't happen every month, because the moon's orbit around the Earth is tilted by about 5 degrees in relation to Earth's orbit around the sun. Only when a full moon coincides with its orbital path lining up with Earth's orbit around the sun can there be a lunar eclipse. One thing I didn't mention last week that I wanted to touch on was the word supermoon. So like all orbits, the moon's orbit around the Earth is elliptical, not perfectly circular. The moon's distance from the Earth varies by about 10% from perigee, or its close point, to apogee, or its far point. When a full moon happens near perigee, it's called a supermoon. This doesn't mean that the moon looms huge in our sky, and there's little astronomical significance to it. It just means that the moon appears a little bit larger and somewhat brighter when it's at apogee. Barely noticeable unless you're comparing side-by-side images. Incidentally, a full moon at apogee, or the far point, is called a micromoon. Shout out to Microbyte, our friend and moderator who regularly eclipses chat trolls and spam bots. So on Tuesday, there was an early morning Starlink launch from Kennedy Space Center. Let's check it out.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Full power. And liftoff.
Vehicle pitching downrange.
Nominal first stage chamber pressures.
Beautiful liftoff. Now, somebody mentioned during the live stream, or they asked about the coloring of the payload fairing, the nose cone at the top. And that is because these two fairing halves were flown on a previous mission. In previous launches, SpaceX used to try to catch the fairings, which would come down on parachutes. They would try to catch them with these nimble ocean-going vessels, but they canceled those operations in favor of simply fishing the fairings out of the ocean and cleaning them up and drying them off. But the coloration on the fairings is because these are previously flown. And a great view of the landing from the booster's perspective.
A great view of first stage here, making its way towards our drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas.
Stage 1 landing burn.
There you can see the landing burn has begun on the first stage. The landing legs will
Terminal
deploy
guidance.
here shortly. Let's see if Falcon 9 can touch down.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy.
Incredible view there. As you can see on your screen, Falcon 9 has touched down on our drone ship.
So, space is hard, rocketry is hard, and there is always the possibility of a mishap, but fingers crossed and knock wood, for a very long time now, SpaceX has proved that the Falcon 9 is an exceptionally reliable vehicle. Then on Thursday, at long last, it was Boeing's time to shine. The launch of Starliner Orbital Flight Test 2, or OFT-2, on a ULA Atlas V rocket. But first, some background. 11 years ago, way back in 2011, the second round of NASA's Commercial Crew Development Program funded a competition for the development of a crew-capable craft to deliver astronauts to and from the ISS. Blue Origin got $22 million for their biconic nose cone capsule concept. SpaceX got $75 million for Crew Dragon. Sierra Nevada got $80 million for Dream Chaser, sort of a mini shuttle. And Boeing got $92.3 million for Starliner. CCDev's third round awarded $212 million to Sierra Nevada, $440 million to SpaceX, and $460 million to Boeing. Blue Origin dropped out, choosing to rely on private funding from their owner, Jeff Bezos, who is alternately either the world's first or second richest man for the past couple of years. A fourth contestant, Alliant Tech Systems, was rejected due to insufficient detail in their proposal for their Liberty launch vehicle. Then in September 2014, SpaceX and Boeing were chosen as the final two commercial crew winners, earning them contracts worth $2.6 billion for SpaceX and a whopping $4.2 billion for Boeing. In 2016, both companies announced that their initial flights would be delayed from 2017 to 2018. Boeing because of issues with the Atlas V N-22 launch vehicle, and SpaceX due to the launch pad explosion of a Falcon 9 with the Amos 6 satellite on board, the only time there's been an explosion of a Falcon 9 rocket. The uncrewed SpaceX Crew Dragon Demo 1 mission launched in March 2019. On board were Ripley the mannequin and the Little Earth plush zero-G indicator, or Globulus Prime as I like to call it. It successfully arrived at the International Space Station, undocked, and splashed down again. However, the very next month, that same crew capsule blew up during a static fire test of its Super Draco engines, causing a further delay in crewed flights for SpaceX. Over at Boeing, Starliner's initial uncrewed test flight was delayed due to a failed test of its abort system. They did have a kind of successful pad abort test in November 2019, which NASA accepted, even though one of the 3 parachutes failed to deploy. Starliner's Orbital Flight Test 1 launched that December, but the onboard computer experienced major issues, causing the mission to be cut short. Starliner's internal mission clock was 11 hours ahead for some reason, causing it to frantically fire its orbital maneuvering and attitude control, or OMAC, thrusters in an attempt to get the spacecraft where the computer thought it was supposed to be at a point 11 hours further into the mission. This depleted the onboard fuel and prevented a planned rendezvous with the ISS. Boeing did manage to get Starliner into a stable orbit, however, so they were able to successfully deorbit and land the craft in the New Mexico desert as planned, just a few days earlier than they had hoped for. Following the failure, Boeing added a second uncrewed Starliner test flight to the schedule, agreeing to cover the extra cost themselves rather than take it from the NASA funds. Meanwhile, over at SpaceX, Crew Dragon Demo 2 astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley made history in May 2020 as the first crew to launch into orbit aboard a private commercial spacecraft. Crew 1 launched that November, then Crew 2 in April 2021, and Crew 3 in November 2021. All was still not well in the Boeing camp, though. In August 2021, as Starliner was on the pad prior to the planned launch of Orbital Flight Test 2, the spacecraft experienced failures in 13 of its 24 fuel oxidizer valves. Their early assessment was that atmospheric moisture had gotten in where it wasn't supposed to be and interacted with the oxidizer, causing nitric acid to form, which corroded the valves and made them stick. Fast forward to last Thursday, Starliner was finally on the pad again and ready for the launch of OFT-2. Let's see how it went.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Starliner is headed back to space on the shoulders of Atlas, powered by a workforce dedicated to its success.
We have confirmation of a good MET epic timer on Starliner.
Atlas executed its roll program.
Already ready is now throttling down to maintain acceptable dynamic pressure on the
crew on board today.
Well, let's fast forward a bit to the SRB separation.
Both SRB. Atlas V now weighs just 1/2 of what it did at launch, burning propellant at a rate of 2,800 pounds per second. And we have indication of SRB jettison.
Atlas continues to ascend using solely the RD-180.
So the spacecraft separated from Atlas V's Centaur upper stage, and once Starliner was on its own, it did not freak out like it did on its first flight. However, there was an issue during the orbital insertion burn when 2 of its OMAC thrusters failed. The first thruster began to fire, but then shut off. The second thruster took over, but then it shut off too. Then a third thruster took over and successfully completed the burn. There are multiple redundancies built into Starliner, as with any crew-rated spacecraft, and the announcers brushed off the thruster failures as not a big concern. But given Starliner's long history of thruster problems, I would say it is cause for concern, and I would hope that Boeing will be conducting some thorough investigations as to the continued complications with their thruster systems. But the hiccup did not, however, prevent Starliner from completing its mission. The OMAC thrusters are used for big burns, like orbit insertion and deorbit, but ISS approach is done with the smaller RCS thrusters, or reaction control system. They weren't quite out of the woods, though. There were reported problems with Starliner's thermal cooling loops and a couple of its RCS thrusters, and docking was delayed by more than an hour due to complications with Starliner's docking mechanism. Mission controllers had to command Starliner to retract its docking ring and reset the system before they could try again. Finally, though, it did dock. This is actually being played at 2 times speed, but they took the final approach to the docking port very slowly and steadily. Let me fast forward a bit here. Doink. And soft capture. So Starliner did make it to the destination. Little bumpy road, but it did get there. And they opened the hatch the following morning. Now, I'm not actually sure why there was such a delay there. So from the time it docked to the time they opened the hatch was more than 12 hours. It's like 15 hours. So I'm not sure why that delay. Maybe it was just a crew scheduling thing, or But and then when they opened the hatch, the one astronaut was wearing a mask, which I thought was curious. Maybe they thought there may be a danger of lingering hypergolics on the outside of Starliner, and they wanted to make sure that the air was clear, before taking their masks off. I'm not sure. But in any case, there it is. And so the plan is to bring back Starliner on next Wednesday, but we shall see. That schedule is still a little bit up in the air at this point. So congratulations to Boeing on finally completing a major milestone in the development and certification of Starliner as the second commercial crew spacecraft available to NASA and the United States and our international partners. Meanwhile, as Starliner was en route to the space station last Friday, China launched a Long March 2C from the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center in the Gobi Desert, with a trio of low Earth orbit satellites that will, quote, carry out verifications of in-orbit communication technologies, unquote, according to official sources. Okay, so a correction to the previous story. According to a couple of people in the chat, it was actually the International Space Station's docking adapter which was experiencing the issue, not Boeing Starliner's docking adapter. So that's it. That is an important distinction to sort of quell the fuming fury of the Boeing haters out there. But in any case, yes. So the word on the street is that it was the ISS docking adapter that was the cause of the the 1 hour plus delay in the docking of Boeing Starliner. But so apologies if I led you down the wrong road earlier, but there you go. There's the correction. So that's actually it for launches last week. Now, looking ahead to this week, on Wednesday, May 25th, Starliner is scheduled to undock from the space station and return to a soft touchdown in White Sands, New Mexico. However, an exact time hasn't yet been published, and the date may change due to weather conditions, so stay tuned. Normally I go off of the NASA TV schedule, but they haven't published anything yet for the Starliner undocking, so we'll just have to wait and see. Also on Wednesday, at 2:35 p.m. Eastern Time, 1835 UTC, a Falcon 9 will launch the Transporter 5 rideshare mission from Cape Canaveral. And that is it. It's a pretty quiet week. So I'd like to take this moment to thank and welcome our new channel members, or our newest channel members, Gordon Whittaker and Bruce Allison. Thank you for your support and welcome to the team. All right, let's get to your questions. What do we have today? All right. Do we have anything today? We do not. All right, let me scroll back to chat and see. I apologize for the dead air. I'm having to visually scan the chat for questions. And I'm not a speed reader, so. Marina Repan says, great photo of Stonehenge with the moon. That was a pretty cool photo. I knew it couldn't have been from this past lunar eclipse because of the orientation of the moon rising in the UK would have been at the wrong time, because totality, let's see, the maximum point of totality was at 12:14 a.m. Eastern Time on early Monday morning, which would have been 04:14 UK time, or 5:15 in the morning British summertime. And so the moon would have been setting, not rising. But all right. Mark Desire says, what? The SpaceX doesn't repaint the fairings? No, they don't repaint the fairings. They probably give them a good hose down, but they don't repaint them. They never have, nor the boosters, which is why with each successive launch of a Falcon 9 booster, it gets more and more toasty blackened from the soot exhaust of the carbon-based fuel, the RP1 fuel. Dead center landing by the Falcon booster. Applebull says, Blue Origin's, and by the way, it's good to see you again, Applebull. Congratulations on finishing college. But Blue Origin's biconic design was pretty neat. Sad that they haven't seemed to continue much with that. I actually don't know much about that, but Blue Origin tends to fly under the radar a lot because they don't publish a lot of sort of media hype about their stuff, unlike SpaceX, which is right out there with it. Now, Dream Chaser is not dead. It did not pass the second round of NASA funding for commercial crew vehicles, or the third round, but Sierra Nevada is still developing it as a private launch platform. So we may see Dream Chaser finally launch next year, I heard, is what they're scheduled for currently. So that's pretty cool. And for those of us of a certain age, it's very reminiscent of the space shuttle because it looks like a mini shuttle. And in fact, it looks like a sleeker version of the X-38 mini shuttle, that unmanned sort of orbital drone that's used by the U.S. Air Force. I think it's still owned by the Air Force and not the Space Force. Let's see. Mark Desire asks, are the ISS crews strictly following UTC/GMT time? Yes, on the space station, because of course the space station orbits the Earth every 92 minutes and crosses every time zone in those in that time. Yes, they do use UTC time aboard the ISS, which is the same as GMT, which is the same as Zulu, which is the same as any one of the other names used for the Universal Coordinated Time. Oh, wow. Okay, so Real Sven Animated says that the Transporter 5 launch will include his very own satellite that he purchased for launch. So apparently our longtime friend Real Sven Animated will have a satellite in orbit come later this week. So congratulations, that's very cool. David Moser says, thanks, Ra, love your channel, and thank you. I know you've been a long-time visitor here, and your presence is always appreciated. MVM Motovlog Music asks, how many astronauts does Starliner fit? So it's equivalent to Crew Dragon in its dimensions and accommodations. The design is capable of accommodating up to 7 crew members, but in the NASA configuration, it will carry 4, just like Crew Dragon. So that's the answer, 4 people. With a maximum of 7, but it would need to be reconfigured for that. Elmo Jones Music Orpheum says, did the UFO hearings last week change your mind on anything? So I for one wasn't aware of any UFO hearings. I mean, I used to have a keen interest in UFOs, but then I got all practical and skeptical about it. Yeah, I wasn't aware of any hearings, and you know, if there was some compelling evidence presented or whatever, I'd be interested to see it, because trying to fill in the gaps of what we don't know or what we're not sure of is a sort of a lifelong pursuit and a fun activity. So yeah, maybe head over to Discord, which I'll link in the chat, and head over to the Raw Space Discord and post a link maybe in the news channel or the chat lounge, and we can check it out. So Rockin' Robbins 13 says, Dream Chaser is still going full blast for Orbital Reef and ISS. So Orbital Reef is Blue Origin's planned private space station. They have some very pretty renderings of it that they've published. And I don't have any personal knowledge of when they plan to launch the first module of their Orbital Reef space station. I don't know if they're waiting for New Glenn so that they can launch it themselves, or if they're going to be using a third-party launch service provider. But yeah, it looks pretty sweet. And apparently, Sierra Nevada has their sights set on it. All right, so it looks like we have caught up with the questions, and that will wrap it up for this week. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate you being here. And until next time, keep it raw, stay safe, and see you later. Bye for now. And may the Bennu be with you.